Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Pop Culture SquadCast Live. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm swell, Bob. How you doing?
I am good. It is a Tuesday night, and we are in your face or ears or interwebs or wherever you are. We're here. It's Tuesday night. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm going to tell you right now, just go subscribe or follow along wherever you are. Hey, Sean, nice to see you. Sherry, nice to see you. We have a pretty big show tonight. We have Jerry Ordway is going to be our guest. He's going to be here in a short amount of time. We're going to talk about some other things. We're going to talk about the first time you hired Jerry. That's it's fun when we do these shows. Like a lot of times we bring in guests who are friends of ours or just creators who are coming up or who are established today. Every once in a while we get to talk to somebody who dramatically altered my existence. And Jerry Ordway is one of those people. I learned things reading books that he drew and wrote. He was very important, creator to my development. So and while I've met him, folks, and we've had conversations, it never ceases to bother me. Hey, Mindy. Mindy's joining us.
Oh, hi, Mindy. I did mention to her that we're going to be on tonight with Jerry. Jerry is one of the nicest humans on earth. We will see if we can disrupt that tonight.
We can try.
I don't know. I've been trying for 40 years.
We can definitely try. I know. We'll get to that. I want to talk about something that's kind of in the pop culture verse thing that we have here. There is a Twitter handle on X. I don't know, it's X handle anyway. It's on that thing that Elon owns, called Geeks and Nerds for Harris Waltz. And I'm going to call attention to it because I think it's pretty cool. The reason I'm calling attention to it is because it all started from this one person who said that they wanted to set up something to create a Zoom for Harris Waltz and have a whole bunch of people. And so that person was none other than Linda Carter, who said she's putting out the bat signal for a special meeting. We're assembling to avenge our rights, geeks and nerds for Harris Waltz. I need our finest superheroes. We need you, who's with me. So that post has turned into a handle. There are 4,000 followers so far, and it's continuing to rise. There's plenty of people who put their names out there who are trying to get involved in it. Where did I wanted to say? It now has a hashtag. I know that certain redheaded writers that we are friends with and know are on the guest list. Other people, and I just think it's fun. I think it's very interesting that comic book folks and nerds and TV people who are all involved in the things, the media and the content that we all enjoy are getting together.
And this was responded to by the most recent dropout from the presidential campaign, who has gone over to join Mr. Trump, that being the incredibly sane Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whose entire family is pissed at him, and publicly so. Probably for driving around with dead bears and dead whale heads.
Dead whale heads. I don't understand.
Well, yeah, but I'm not into fish. Of course, it's a mammal. You're right. I don't understand it. Nope. But he invoked Wonder Woman's name. Not Linda's, not Gal's.
I did that. He did say that today. Now that was today. this has been going on for a little bit of time, but yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't live in this time-space continuum.
That's fair. That is fair. Yeah, I don't even want to talk about, like, if you feel like caring about what Robert Kennedy Jr., who he compared to Wonder Woman, you can go look it up, but I'm not going to give it any airtime.
All I can tell you is he can't compete on so many different levels, including the visual. For example, Jerry Ordway would not draw him the way he draws Diana.
Well, that is true. But anyway, the point being that it is Wonder Woman herself who is saying, "Hey, let's go do this." And I love the fact that at this time in her life, she has fully embraced her role and her place in the nerddom, and she's fully a part of it. She was. I'm not sure if you were at the Baltimore Comic Con that she was at a few years ago.
Yeah, well, I was.
You were there.
I was. Yeah.
We went to her little concert, which was totally awesome. You know, she was awesome. She's great. She's embracing that, and I think that's great. It'll be great when Taylor, comes out and says everybody should vote for Harris, and then people can get upset at her.
They're already upset. They're just waiting to have the reason.
That's fair. That's fair.
I just have no idea why she attracts the hostility that she does. I mean, she's popular, very, very popular, probably extremely popular. And therefore, her stuff is well liked by millions and millions and millions of people. And what? She has a point of view? She wants to fight for this planet? God bless her.
So we've now morphed into analyzing why the haters hate Taylor Swift. And so for anybody who just joined in the last 20 seconds, that's what we're talking about. And the answer is very clear. It's very simple. She is her power, her control of her own self and her fame and her decisions is threatening to white middle-aged men and to other men who feel that they can't control her. And that's the problem that every woman who is in the public eye has.
Absolutely. As a former white middle-aged man, I can attest to that.
Well, yeah.
I don't.
I'll take your role.
Thank you. I was going to hand it to you, actually. When it comes to performers, my favorite singer is, or was actually, she died a few years ago, Coco Taylor, blues singer.
Mm-hmm.
And one of her albums was called Force of Nature. It was the most appropriately named record I'd ever seen in my life. Because if you listen to her, she was a true force of nature. She'd blast you out of the room with the power of her voice. And all I can think of is if somebody said something to Taylor Swift, it would make every headline in the world. If somebody said something to Coco Taylor, she would have killed him.
Yep. Well, she has restraint. I don't.
And contracts.
Yes, she's a smart woman.
Yes.
That is where they have missed the point the most. She is a very smart woman.
Well, but they think they're the only people who are smart. All us stupid people are out there doing what we're doing, probably just to piss them off. And that's a good reason, but it's a secondary reason.
You're right. I can't argue with you. I want to let's talk about a couple of new number ones that are out this week because there's a couple of very interesting things. No, we're not going to go through the whole list. It's not a huge list, and it's not a great list. I'm going to tell you, it's a fourth or fifth week in August. Everybody's waiting for the fall for the new launches and stuff. But there's a couple things, and I know this one is exciting for you, for me.
Yes.
Archie, have you read it yet? Because I haven't read it yet.
No. I will probably read that first of all of the books that are released this week. This will be the one I go to first. Yes,
Archie the Decision, number one, written by Tom King, art by Dan Parent. Been very excited for this since it first was announced. I talked to Dan a bit about it and how he's excited for it. And hopefully this is the beginning of multiple things. There aren't very many bigger Archie fans that I know besides Tom King. I'm not saying there aren't any. I'm saying there are not many.
I'm pretty big at it myself.
I know you are.
Which surprises.
I'm not putting you guys on a scale. I'm just saying.
No. I understand that. And besides, we've had both Tom and Dan on the show, and we've talked about that. Obviously, more so with Dan, who's just one of the reasons why you should go to a comic book convention. If Dan is there, just go there and watch him draw. But I'm a huge fan of the 1940s and 50s Archie. Bob Montana's creation and his early work. He did the strip until the 60s. And the people it's still a family-owned concern, which is really cute. I mean, it's the last of the family-owned comic book publishers. And I guess they're on their, third, fourth generation now. And they're not afraid to take risks. They used to be kind of afraid to stand behind those risks.
I think they still are.
Now they're hesitant. They release things as like one shots or three parters, but they build to something else. So the company continues to go ahead to move forward.
I will say that is true. I think that from my understanding, the company is, very committed to continuing to, feed the cash cow of the digests. But, they are moving forward. They are trying new things. I think this is going to be the first of multiples, which I'm looking forward to. The stuff they're doing on the horror side, I think has a lot to do with the tenacity of Mike Pellerito and Jamie Rotante. I think they're doing a great job on the editorial side of things, trying to flesh out some stuff.
Also, they're expanding their list of creators on some of these horror titles and some of the sort of MLJ one shots that they do every once in a while.
I want more MLJ. Like, I think that by the time I get to be your age, maybe we'll have like some sort of semblance of a good MLJ story.
Oh,
I have time.
Check out a story from 1966, I think, 67, from the Mighty Crusaders. I think it's number 4. And of all people, it was written by Jerry Siegel. You've probably heard of him.
I may have that issue.
And yeah, the story is called Too Many Heroes. And they bring in all of the old MLJ. MLJ was the original name, Archie Comics. They brought in all of those superheroes. It was a good story. It was a real story. It wasn't just a parody or let's get all these guys together and goof off. It was a real story. Paul Reinman, I think, drew it. And it was a great story. I mean, it was exactly what we needed then. And what's odd is that right now, I think it's with the multiverse and people debating whether we're tired of all of this and all these characters. I think it works just as well today.
I don't doubt it.
I think number 4.
I'm writing it down. so I remember to look at it. Okay. This is coming out tomorrow. It's going to be good. I have a lot of feelings about it. So this is coming out tomorrow too, and I find this hilarious. And I apologize to Marvel and whatever, but I was at happened to be in a bar at a convention. Happens occasionally, and a question was asked to an executive: when are we going to get Star Wars and Marvel Avengers crossover? And there was an answer given. I'm not going to get into that answer. It was off the record. I'm not going to talk about that. However, it's not going to happen. It's not. I don't want to spread any rumors. There's nothing. It was just conjecture. But this is existing. So now Marvel is able to cross over their superhero characters with other things that make no sense whatsoever.
I mean, like Conan.
Yeah, well, that too. That doesn't happen anymore. That's gone. I don't know. I don't know if that was...
I like the Savage Avengers with Conan. I enjoyed it.
I understand. I have a feeling I've heard rumored that the Savage Avengers with Conan was part of the reason why they don't have Conan anymore. That the Howard estate was not pleased.
Everybody's a critic. You do something great, really great, and some people are just not going to get it. And usually among those people are the folks who think that they're going to be earning a living by doing nothing but owning the character.
Well, there's a lot of people who think that's the case. So anyway, Aliens versus Avengers comes out tomorrow. I don't know that I'm going to read it, but I mean, it's got some great creators on it. You know, Jonathan Hickman's great. I'm sure he's going to craft a great tale. It said Ribic is amazingly good.
Look at the pictures.
This I thought you would enjoy. This is coming out from Oni Press tomorrow. We are turning on kids to graphic narrative storytelling.
And what's the format?
It's a single issue. It's four single comic book single issues. So when people go to the comic shop, there's a comic to buy for their kids.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I sincerely hope it gets great distribution. I'm sure the trade paperback certainly will. Anything we can do to seduce the little kids back into comic books, and we've made a little progress on that over the years. I am saddened to say that the publishers and many of the distributors were against going after the children's audience because they don't spend enough money in comic book stores. To which I respond, well, who the fuck are you going to sell your comic books to in 5 years?
Well, again, I think this is great. We are friends with the writer, Joe Esposito, who also wrote The Pedestrian with Sean Von Gorman. I don't know. He might be watching. Anyway, we're excited about Sesame Street. Grover Lends a Hand comes out tomorrow. Number one, there are other group. There's other writers on. I don't remember who they are, but like each month there's going to be a different creative team with a different story. So we're excited about that. Just want to let everybody know that our guest is here. He's in the green room. We're going to get to him just shortly. So hang on. Jerry Ordway will be here shortly. I want to take a moment, and this is a little behind the scenes under the covers. If anybody who went to Holy Redeemer is watching, I see you guys. So this comes out tomorrow. This is the 0 Hour 30th anniversary special. Let's see who did ink this cover. Ooh, Jerry Ordway inked this cover. This is an 80-page special. What a coincidence. This is part of the reason why I wanted to have Jerry on this week. We've obviously I want to have him on, but like this is the 30th anniversary of 0 Hour, which makes me feel extremely old. And it's an 80-page special written by Ron Mars and Dan Jurgens, with Jerry and a whole bunch of cast of amazing creators working on this book. I have not read it. I'm looking forward to reading it. And it comes out tomorrow, so it's pretty cool.
Well, I see prominently on that cover, most prominently on that cover, a character we haven't seen much of in the DCU, to the best of my knowledge, who happens to be one of the absolute top favorite characters of one of our regular writers over on Pop Culture Squad, Mark Fishman. And he's always been pissed that Kyle hasn't had a shot. Well, here we go.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had a lot to do with that. I spoke to Ron Mars earlier this year, a few weeks ago, and we were talking about that and talking about how when he was told to remove Hal Jordan from the everyday world of the DC universe, get rid of him and bring in a new one, and he brought in Kyle, which was fantastic. He did not know that, like, when he started getting the idea for what 0 Hour was going to be, which was about a year later, he didn't know that, oh, Hal's the villain. And
oops,
that's bad. So that he thought Al was going to be away for a long, long time, and that didn't happen.
If I were Hal, I'd go away just out of disgust. I remember when he was the only Green Lantern on the block. It was great.
Good. It's good. He's a great Green Lantern. I have no problems with him. I want to. We're gonna get to our guest in just one moment. I just want to take another 2 minutes and just talk about something pop culture related. The way we talk about comics all the time. I also want to bring up movies, and there is an interesting trend that we've kind of looked at recently, and that is that. So last week, The Crow came out. It was the big release of last week, the remake of The Crow. It's not doing well. Most people say that's deserved and that it's not very good. I have a fantasy football league that is called the Geeks and Geezers Football League. It's a bunch of nerds.
That's great.
Yeah, and bunch of old nerds, and one of us happened to have been invited to see the pre-screening of The Crow, and was I think if we say he was not impressed, that would be an understatement. It was not something he enjoyed. But movies continue, studios continue. 2020.
Let me ask you a question. Sorry to interrupt, but that's
Go ahead.
What I do. Who plays the lead in the movie?
Bill Skarsgård.
Is he still alive?
Yes, thankfully.
Well, he's doing better than the others.
I know.
Tragic.
It's tragic. It was tragic. But according to Box Office Mojo, as of this date, the 2024 worldwide box office results. This is sorted by domestic box office, just in America. You need to get to the 11th movie of the release this year to find something that is not either a remake or a sequel or a prequel, but something that is original. And it ends with Us is the 11th highest domestic producing movie this year, and that is an original adaptation. Thank you, Karen, for watching.
Oh, thank you. And that's from a woman who's named Green.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, what is that thing? What is that thing that we're existing with, where everything is a sequel or some other property that we've seen before where
The,
the
the
movie
answer
experience is not an original experience?
the answer to that question is like a neon sign on a dark night. It costs so much money to make a movie that everybody wants to protect their investment, which means their jobs, not their investment. It's not their money. So in order to protect their investment, they use something that was a success before.
Sure.
Give me $150 million and we will repeat this success. And that does happen from time to time. And sometimes it starts franchises. So it's sometimes it works out really well. More often than not, no.
I mean, it's a lack of I find it to be a lack of vision and a lack of guts. And it's not my money. It's not my job that's making those millions of dollars, making those decisions. But this is the same reason why I question and have issues with the casting of Robert Downey Jr. Love Robert Downey Jr. Think he was great Iron Man, but my opinion is that he was cast specifically because Marvel knows that they made a lot of money with him and they want to make a lot of money with him again.
Yes, but he can pull it off. I think, I hope, I believe. If they cast somebody who wouldn't be able to pull that off in that role.
My point is there are plenty of people who could pull it off.
Yeah, Sean Connery's dead. Who else?
There's plenty of people. I'm not going to go through the list. I don't know. I haven't done that, but I know that he's not the only one. I know that he can't be the only one.
There's something I need to remind those of us here with some sort of historical perspective on our culture. You look at the major and even the minor movie studios during the studio era, during the first 50 years, 60 years of film. And all those companies, certainly by the end of the war, many of them before the beginning of World War II, were bankrupt. They got sold, they got moved, they got pushed around, they got incorporated into something else, they just went away. But making movies has always been a high-risk operation. Studios were able to parlay that off when they owned the theaters, so many of the theaters that they were showing their movies on, and gave people like Warner Brothers the incentive to produce a new movie every week because they had this chain they had to feed. But in the late 40s, a few years after the war, the government broke that up, and that was probably the right thing to do. It destroyed the code, which is worthy, and it gave a lot of independent filmmakers an opportunity to make films independently. But we have to remember that the model for making big budget movie successes never really worked all that well.
Sure. I get you. I mean, I want to get to our guest. We could spend hours and hours and hours talking about.
Jerry's old enough; he can stop growing.
I want to bring him in. I want to bring in. So everybody, thanks for this. We're gonna get back. We'll get back to the state of the film business another time. Please, make sure you subscribe to our channel wherever you're watching this. But I want to introduce you all and bring in our friend, cartoonist, comic book artist, writer, fantastic human, Jerry Ordway. Hey, Jerry.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you feeling?
How you
Uh,
feeling, man?
I still feel a little bit rocky. I mean, COVID's not fun, I can tell you.
Well,
But
Where do you think you procured it?
probably at the con, but after the con, when I wear my mask at my table and stuff, but in the evening you go out to eat, and you're walking through a crowd or whatever. I mean, you don't know.
I
Seems
blame
like
Rich.
Yeah, seemed like most people. It's funny because there one other guy that was with us on Saturday night uh, wound up getting it as well, and my daughter got it from me because obviously I had it and I didn't know. I mean, I tested I think Wednesday and tested negative, and then
What
Thursday.
are fathers for?
Yeah, I mean, you feel guilty though. You rather give them something productive than non-productive, but
Yeah. My kids gave it to me, so therefore it went the opposite way. When I had it 2 years ago, right after Terrificon.
yeah.
Well, you look good, Jerry. Although I do note that you have dramatic lighting.
No, it's just my studio lighting.
It's great, though. It is great. It's good lighting. So glad you're doing better.
Thank you.
I want you to get better. What we have a moment. So tomorrow is the release of the 0 Hour book.
Mhm.
Can you tell us about how that was approached to you? I heard your pages are beautiful. I haven't seen them yet, but that's been told to me. I have no doubt.
My agents. Oh yeah, it's great.
Your agent from Albany.
Yeah. It was funny because I basically had been given. I got an email from the editor. I think in this case, I think I did hear from the editor around the same time as I did Dan Jurgens, and Dan and I have known each other probably since I gotta say 1981. I think we met at the Chicago Con back in those old days. And we worked on the original 0 Hour, and he had mentioned, I mean, somewhere along the line, it was like, oh, would you be interested in drawing a chapter? Because it was going to be like we'd done the Superman special, Death of Superman and Return of Superman, and those were done as kind of almost like one was a chapter thing, and then the Return of Superman was kind of a jam story. So, Dan was going to work on a section, and it was, I mean, it's a lot of pages, like 80 pages, I think.
It's 80
So,
pages.
yeah. So they said, 10 pages, and, we're thinking that you can do the JSA. And I'm like, oh, great. That sounds cool. And then, how much changes by the time you start or you say yes. I think by the time, I think it was early April till like at some point in May, it was like, oh, it's still going to be the JSA related. And you're just part of a bigger story. I mean, there's not much you can do about it. It's not much, the story is kind of something that they're hammering together, and fans don't realize that none of these things happen in a vacuum. They're crafted by the writers, but they're also crafted by an editor, outside sources, DC. I mean, it's always hard to do the story you want, I think, but you wind up somehow making it work. So yeah, I think it kind of came together, and I think I had like maybe a month and a half or 2 months of waiting to actually start drawing it. But the cover, Dan and I did that back in, I want to say, first week of April. It was done for preview, so probably done by third week of April.
I'm just saying, I think you guys turned this around. An 80-page book turned around fairly quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
in today's world.
Well, I mean, breaking it up in chapters helps. That's why
Sure.
they do it. I mean, I think as Mike can attest, in the old days, the entire plot was approved and ready to go. And if it was just one artist, you would have had a couple months to do it. It wouldn't have been like, oh, all the lead time is eaten up because people are still fighting over which characters can be in it, which characters can't be in it. And then, oh, you only have a week to draw it, so let's get 10 guys to do it, or 10 people. I mean, that's kind of how it works now. For better or worse, it's instant comics, but it's not the best way.
Well, I mean, we have a tradition of instant comics going back to the very, very beginning.
Right.
If you're on You got all your pals together in a hotel room, and you jammed out the stories. You jammed out the 80-page
Right.
book, 60-page book. You know, you mentioned Justice Society, something with which you were very familiar. You remember the original Justice Society stories. Each chapter was drawn by, usually by the artist who regularly drew that character. You know, so if it was a Hawkman story, Hawkman was in the Justice Society, of course, and all of it. You get Joe Kubert in the 1940s to draw the Hawkman story, which to me is value added. Sometimes it works out.
Yeah.
I mean, to kind of gonna go around. Mike brings up stuff, and then I have to change what I was going to say. So I was gonna go to you. We'll get back to Mike and Jerry's history, but you just brought up. So I got, and I said this earlier, and I don't know if you were there, but like, I don't think you understand how much I appreciate what you have created in this world, and Infinity Inc. meant so much to me. These characters are very important to me. I was a huge fan of Infinity Inc. I was a huge fan of All-Star Squadron. Those were things that I made sure I got all the time because I wanted to know them. And you exposed me to a world to a historical world. It turns out I ended up being a history major because part of it probably had to do with how much I loved historical comics and the comics that you guys were making. How did you come on to Infinity Inc.? Were you approached by Roy? Were you approached by editor? How did that work?
For Infinity Inc., DC had started doing direct-only comics, like direct to the market. And that was kind of like this is going to be our new wave because they're fully profitable because of the fact there were no overprinting like on a newsstand.
And the first issue was a Baxter issue, right? So
they were all done on good printing. They were I think Baxter paper, which was a whiter, obviously more archival paper, and it was done offset, which totally different because again, the letterpress, the old,
you could get to the bleed and stuff.
And the old presses were falling apart. There are a lot of problems, so they were hoping this was the next wave, plus profitable. When we started, I think Teen Titans and I feel like Teen Titans and Legion of Superheroes were already announced as going to be that. And Roy Thomas always, and this is not a bad thing. I'm not saying but Roy always wanted to be part of any of if there's something good going on at DC, he felt like they brought me in, I'm a superstar from Marvel. I want a direct sale book too. I feel like that was kind of an impetus. Maybe he has a different opinion on that, but at the time, we
can go with that. I'm fine with that.
Well, at the time, we also got dragged along. So when I was working on All-Star Squadron, Mike Macklin and I started working on character designs for Infinity Inc. And in some cases, it wasn't just designing them. We'd be given a name and the name wouldn't stick, or it would be, come up with a design for something that didn't work. So there was a lot of
stick.
Well, there was originally an Our Man 2, and he was a African American character, and we had Harlequin was a male Harlequin, was kind of what became Obsidian in a way. It was going to be one of the Green Lantern children. So a lot of stuff was happening kind of last minute. So we were coming up with powers for the characters as well in some cases, based on names that Roy and his wife had done. So originally Mike Macklin was going to pencil it and I was going to ink it because I was really looking for a break. It's hard drawing a book set in the 40s with a potential cast of 500 characters,
Sure.
And so I was kind of getting burned out.
You're already doing that.
I was. And I was getting burned out on it. So Mike was going to jump in and pencil, and Mike had a very Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko kind of style as seen. He penciled the first 2 covers. And so I finished All-Star Squadron working towards the end, finished an annual, which tied into the Infinity Inc. characters and the time travel. And then I was supposed to work on the Earth versus the Justice, or America versus the Justice Society.
Yeah.
Which was like the Roy did wind up doing it, I think, with Richard Howell and Alfredo Alcala, I think.
You did covers though.
Oh yeah, I did the covers for it. So, but I was supposed to pencil that, and then at some point, they had given Mike Macklin an issue of All-Star Squadron as a fill-in, as a test, and the pencils were coming a little too slow. So at a certain point, Dick Giordano said, "Flip it, Jerry pencils, Mike inks," because they kind of had a start date for it. So Mike was disappointed. I was a little disappointed, but we both, come up with these characters, designs and stuff. So it was kind of exciting. We had story ideas that we had wanted to do. And so we just hit the ground running. I mean, it's a case of an editorial decision. Maybe they always meant to pull the switch on us, but I don't think so, because again, Roy missed out on me drawing the Justice Society miniseries, and I know he wanted me to do that. So, but yeah, we started that, and it was like a new process as well, because the people don't realize that the art board for those full bleed books were 10 by 15 live area, which is what a normal comic page is, like 11 by 17 with a 10 by 15 live area. Well, the bleed area extended, like almost 2 inches all around. So they were giant art boards. So it was a really huge thing. And when you're drawing, you're used to drawing on these small things, and suddenly you have the reverse where you're on this really big kind of palette or, canvas. I was really having fun filling the space and feeling like, oh, look, I can do this, and I can bleed off the edge, and it was kind of exciting from a drawing point of
great
view.
Stuff.
Yeah. And the other funny thing was, I remember at the time back when they launched the Outsiders, that Mike Barr had come to me at some convention or something. He said, I gave Jim Aparo your Infinity inks, and because I just liked the way you used the layout and the way you used the space and the full bleed and stuff. And I couldn't have been more, proud to hear that.
Sure.
Because again, it really is a design thing. I mean, when you're drawing a comic and you don't think about how something might bleed into a gutter, or, you use that for a visual effect rather than like, look, I can draw somebody's eyeball right to the edge of the paper. It's more of a case where you're drawing you want to draw the action across something, but then you have to think, if I bleed on this side, the facing page, the next one in line kind of can't be full bleed because the reader is going to get confused. So there was a lot of mental thought going into how to set up stuff and still make it exciting. So,
and they were still using ad flats in those days.
Yeah. So you
weren't
control.
Always certain where the breaks were going to be.
No, but we did one thing that was good, and we knew that page 2 and 3 was always going to be a spread. And even if it wasn't necessarily described as a spread, I often tried to create a spread, because I feel like
brilliant.
Well, when you open that book, it really did feel like added value to get a big image, even if it was a big image that went half a page, but all the way across, and then panels along the bottom. It still felt like a widescreen movie or something,
It also allowed for the writer to use that first page, instead of as a splash page, as a setup page. You can start things going on that first page, and people turn the page, and then bam, you have the splash.
I remember George doing a lot of that, even before it was Baxter, when in especially in Titans, in Volume 1. There was a lot of, like, I remember there's the issue with Thunder and Lightning's, when you turn to page 2 or 3, it's a giant splash.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's brilliant. And
that
again,
was the signature move of Simon and Kirby's from pretty much day one.
Yeah. Really, I remember seeing it in the old Captain America reprints. I remember thinking, like, wow, I don't think anybody was doing a double page spread in the 40s. I mean, because you had a lot of 10 panel pages and things.
What's the most panel? Did you ever turn back something where there are too many panels on a page?
No, I mean,
let me ask you a question. As was Jerry Ordway the person who ever complained about a script page, or did you just do it even though you knew it wasn't?
I would do
try to
both.
make the best of it.
I would do both.
So you would say something.
I would complain because one of the things that a lot of writers would do back in the day of like, especially full plot, plot style.
Okay.
Plot first is that Roy would do it. Marv Wolfman did it. It was amazing. They would type up like their plot, and the first 4 pages, it was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get a whole issue to you, even though you're waiting to draw that next thing. Every day you don't have a script, you're losing time at the deadline, which is incrementally bad month to month, right? So you need a full script ready, or a full story ready to go. But these guys always would turn in, here's the first 4 pages, or here's the first 5 pages, so you can get started. And what in a lot of cases, both guys, but Marv did it especially, was that the first, say, 4 pages, whatever he'd send you, would be packed with so much, and you would do it, and then you'd get the rest of the plot, page 5 to 21 or 2 or whatever, and it would be the regular 22-page story in there. So in other words, it was like a stall to get you working, but it wasn't the actual beginning of that story. It would be like, oh, here's my story. So you just have too much content. And when I complained about it to Marv said, well, I put in a lot because not everybody can draw it, or not everybody will draw it. So you pick and choose. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to pick and choose. I don't know what you think is important and not important. So I would always try to do whatever was down there. And it would annoy me that there'd be 10 pages on a page, but I always felt like I didn't want to second guess. Like, whoever's writing it is the person who knows or should know what is going to be important. Like, is this scene with, Pa Kent important, or can I cut part of that? Or is the scene with some guy walking on the street important? I don't know that, and in a lot of cases, I don't have the whole plot, so I don't know. And, imagine drawing it, right? Say you start drawing the thing and you say, well, there's no room for this guy walking on the street or a guy on a bicycle getting hit by a car. Maybe you leave that out, and then you get the rest of the plot, and that guy's the main focus. You never know that. That could happen, and then you'd be stuck with maybe having to find time to redraw that character into an early page. I just never wanted to deal that because there's never enough time to do it anyways. So I just, I was always trying to do whatever I was given, and I try to make do with it, even if I didn't like it, if I didn't like having to do 10 panels or something. But that's just the way it goes,
There's a financial incentive there.
Yeah.
Not for you, for the writer. Because you can churn out more scripts if you know how to keep all of your artists busy. That relieves a bunch of different editors who may be competing with each other for your time to work.
Yeah.
I don't think it always brought out the best in comics. There were some writers who were very good and could knock that out and handle it just fine. There were some writers who you knew they were lost.
Yeah.
They get lost in their own stories.
Yeah.
And it's very careful. I'm not a huge fan of the plot first. For me, it's whatever the story needs and whatever the creators of that story need and feel most comfortable with.
Yeah.
But the plot first concept goes back to Fiction House. I mean, Murphy Anderson used to draw that way for Planet Comics.
I gotta say though, I like it because the artists, especially when I felt like when I was first starting, it was the only way that I felt like I could get something in there of my own. And working for the last 20 years, mostly on a full script with dialogue, is less fun in a lot of respects, but I understand it's like you basically are drawing to the amount of dialogue. A lot of artists seem to not understand that. And I look at comics and it really bugs me to see balloons stacked on top of somebody's head or body or something, but it happens because they're not thinking. I talked to somebody.
Too many words too.
Well, there's too many words, but people have abused the continued conversation over a panel where this guy speaks, then that guy's balloon goes. It's the Tom Orzechowski thing from X-Men that everybody abuses because digital lettering can make that work somehow.
Well,
So
because
you have
Chris has too
one
many
guy
images.
speak, and when you're drawing it, you have, in my head, I have to imagine it like, okay, if that guy's the first guy to speak, but there's 5 balloons after him and he's got 3 of them here, you have to figure out whether the other guy speaks first, but
No.
this other balloon goes first. I mean, it's really, it's a weird thing. But anyways, what I was going to say is what I liked working with Roy, especially as far as the plot thing, was that Roy was used to it. And it did give me a feeling of I can contribute to this. And then when the issue came out, it's like, see that panel? That's what I put into it. You know, that little bit, like a character bit with Liberty Bell and Johnny Quick, that's something that I put in there or whatever, you know. I mean, so it was like throwing me a bone because I always felt like I had stories in my head that I wanted to tell, you know. And some people don't, and some people, that's totally cool as well. Some people are, you know, like they just like the act of putting the storytelling down and working from a full script. Some people don't. I know famously Alex Toth had that, you know, horrible experience at Marvel with the plot style. And I met him years later at a Dallas con, and he still was like bothered by the fact that the balloons came afterwards, because the balloons were, you know, the word balloons are part of the panel design. And it was, you know, he made it work, and it works in his, you know, in his style. And I could see him going totally nuts with Stan Lee or someone's balloons going, and then we got to put a balloon over somebody's foot over here that, you know, that drove him nuts, you know.
I listen, it's something that the casual fan does not understand about making comics. And you know, we're here to enlighten, you know, and experience. There's a project I'm working on where, you know, one of the notes that I had recently was, you know, hey, the script based on where the art's designed, the first person speaking is not on the left part of the panel.
Right.
So that can't happen that way. We have to figure out how to fix that around, you know.
And that's what you do have to think about. And a lot of people don't, because it is kind of like the nuts and bolts stuff that it seems obvious to me because I'm the guy who has to try to make it work. But again, I think it's because digital, and you know, I feel bad for the digital letterers because they're kind of like they're the last gap, and they kind of have to make it work, because I don't think editors now are making the writers rewrite anything that doesn't necessarily flow. You know, I think it's always been, let's move on because there's always next issue or whatever. I mean, that's always been the case. But
there was a third approach that was used very, very successfully by one guy and all of his artists. Harvey Kurtzman, when he was doing, for example, Mad Comics, would give the artists, all of whom were his friends and some of whom were his former schoolmates, laid out pages. Harvey's layouts would be there in pencil form, but the letters, the balloons, Ben Oda would fully letter those pages.
Right.
So you, as the artist, got to draw around all.
Right.
And you'd think that would be highly restrictive, but then you look at, like, oh my God, Willie Elder got all of that chicken fat into the story.
Right.
Wally Wood is Wally Wood.
Yeah.
You know, and they all made it work and look absolutely beautiful. And you would think, I would think at least, that is the most restrictive form for an artist.
But a lot of people like I mean, obviously Keith Giffen did the breakdowns for Justice League when he and DeMatteis were writing for Kevin Maguire and for other artists. And I think there is obviously an advantage to that. I mean, I did a kind of a variant of that when I was writing my own work, when I was drawing it and writing it. And it really involved breaking down super stick figure roughs with balloon placements, sending them off to the letterer. In my case was usually John Costanza, my favorite. I get those pages back, and then I could tightly pencil, even though I was sending them off to Dennis Janke to ink, I felt like I got a second fresh set of eyes on them, because it would be like 2 weeks later, when I'm actually penciling on those. So it was like a really, and the same system, I guess, Walt Simonson
Yeah,
used when he was
Walter and
doing
John
Thor.
did the same thing.
And it was because Mike Carlin had edited, the Walt on Thor. I mean, it was something that was natural for Mike. And it was really my favorite way of working. Even when I worked on the Tom Strong stuff with Alan Moore, and his scripts would come in through the fax machine, and my fax machine didn't.
You never have paper?
Well, I had it set not to cut at 12 at each page length, because the pages would come in and there'd be like, a 3-foot faxed page, which was ultimately maybe 1 page of Tom Strong. So I didn't want it cutting it and then trying to figure out and having to figure it out. But I would do that with the Tom Strong stuff. And it was absolute. I couldn't imagine any other way to do that, because some of those stories had like 10 panel pages where important stuff was there that you couldn't leave to have covered up by a letterer. So I would lay the pages out very roughly again, do the balloon placements, and Todd Klein would finish lettering the balloons, and I'd get the pages back to do finished pencils. So I was penciling around those. And again, the best part is that it gave me like a couple of weeks or a week away from having done the little layout, going, I'll do a slightly different angle that won't affect how the balloons go, but I can do a little, reimagining what I might have wanted to draw, or an angle of the character or whatever. So it's a little bit like a hybrid of the Kurtzman, approach in a way, because
That's
you are
true.
still getting the lettering and able to work around it, rather than having to draw a big complicated city scene and then have balloons covering buildings or cars that might still have taken you a couple hours to draw. That's still, I guess, the most annoying part of the plot style work is that. But now everybody has to do it, because full scripts are not lettered on the board. So you have to draw everything, and then you hope for the best. I always do balloon placements, because I don't trust the editors. I also don't know if I can trust the editors, because I'm always working with different people. So
Sure.
I always do a balloon placement as a separate file to send them, because
No
here's
shape
what I'm
editors.
thinking. Yeah. And no, I mean, it's not, it's again, comics
Listen.
are weird. And again, it's like you saying, you figure out how the sausage is made or whatever. There's a lot of different ways to make the sausage,
Yeah. Sometimes you have Polish, sometimes you have German, all kinds of different.
but people still don't know how
Italian,
it they like
First of
different
all,
flavors.
your Milwaukee accent comes in when you say sausage.
Nice package.
Second of all, I think what you're talking about it seems to me must have been really difficult to do with Alan's scripts, because Alan's scripts weren't scripts. They were phone books.
Yeah.
I would feel bad for the mailman who had to walk him up the stairs when we were in Evanston doing the flag with Alan, because like an 8-page story, we'd have about a ream and a half.
Yeah.
You had to buy, fax toner in like bulk, right?
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, when I worked on his scripts, I was very impressed with how down to minute detail he saw it in his mind's eye. He's my all-time favorite writer, comic-wise. And I liked him before that. I could have come away from that hating him. I didn't, because it felt like, I've said this, maybe even said it on this before, but doing like the Tom Strong stuff, I worked on it for a couple of years. I did a bunch of fill-ins. I did individual little stories. It always felt like you got a school assignment that was really tough, and you had to work really hard at it, but then you were really proud when you got like a for, from your teacher. That's what it was like working on an Alan Moore thing, because you always felt like, number one, I don't want to be the guy that failed this story, because the story's good and it's so fully realized. But yeah, I'm friendly with Dave Gibbons for years, and Dave was always kind of funny about that stuff, because I remember telling him, I think I showed him some pages from a Tom Strong, and he just told me the story about Watchmen and having this overly described panel and motes of, like streams of light coming through the window and motes of dust. And then when he turned the page in and he gave it to Alan, he said, of course, the motes are implied, And I went, oh, you mean you don't have to put everything down there? Wow.
Yeah, it's quite an adventure. Alan and Dave did my all-time favorite comic book story. It was a time twister for 2000 AD, and it was a parody of a parody, which somebody must have told Alan it can't be done, and Alan said, "Screw you!" And then boom, it was a parody of the Mad Comics parody of the Dragnet TV show.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And the story, he kept on referencing this one point in time, this one lobby in a hotel. And you'd go back to the first time you'd see it, the second time, the third time you'd see it, the same shot, and it's all there. You just didn't notice that stuff because it wasn't the story the first time. That story is magic. It's absolute magic.
There's not much. Listen, we're talking about some people who have really mastered the form. I want to talk a little bit about Adventures of Superman.
Mm-hmm.
You were on this book for over 50 issues. It's the longest run you had, whether you were drawing, and this is where you got to write for DC for quite some time. What was that experience like for you on this book?
It was exciting at first.
Okay.
But then within again, this is what comics is like. You start with all the best intentions and all the enthusiasm, and then stuff goes wrong. And in the case of Superman, we lost our lead time in doing the first two issues. And
really?
Again, yeah. And it's like, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't Mike Macklin's fault. So, but it was just a bad time for the writer. He was going through stuff. But meanwhile, I'm sitting there watching the days go by, knowing that I can't get that time back. So I think the very third issue was the Legends crossover, is what I recall. And that one, Andy Helfer said, I said something like, oh, well, I guess Marv didn't want to do it at all. So Mike Macklin, Alvey, and I just sat around the studio. It's like, we just started throwing ideas around, and I just wrote out a plot and turned it in. And then Andy sent it to Byrne, and Byrne kind of rewrote it. But that was my first co-plotting credit. And it was merely, a lot of it was just to keep myself having pages to do. It's almost like a defensive thing. So anyways, but that's what it was like. And that first year was really hard because of that. So by issue 4, you started 424, by 428, 429, it was so tight month to month. And Mike Macklin had quit after the first one because all of his lead time was gone. He was just, he wanted to spend time on the pages. He didn't want to try to have to be 10 pages a day. He wasn't capable of it. So I wound up inking the second one. I wound up trying to ink after that until they could find somebody to ink, the book. So it was really stressful. And we had to fill in, and I moved to Connecticut in the midst of that. I think around issue Adventures 430, I want to say 431 or 32 or something like that. I knew I needed to be closer to the office, and I felt like if I'm ever going to get a chance to co-plot or write, nobody listens to you when you're far away. So it felt like
you did all of All-Star Squadron and Infinity Inc. and all. You were still in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and Crisis, all that was. So I moved in the beginning of 1987. I moved in March, and again, it was kind of it was something. The situation kind of pushed it to a degree, but a lot of it was the idea that, I was kind of tired of depending on other people to keep me busy. I mean, the promise is when you're on a regular monthly book is that you're going to get a monthly plot or script, and I wasn't taking a vacation in the middle of drawing an issue. I was there. I was waiting for script to draw because I was aware, again, I knew the deadline. I knew you have to keep up with it. There's nothing worse than not having any lead time. I mean, any editor will tell you that, because that's where the dreaded deadline doom fill-in comes from,
Sure.
And I was begging for a fill-in because I told Andy had transitioned kind of to Mike, Carlin being the editor, and it was both of them at one point. But, I said, I can't do this. And Mike was like worried about having a fill-in in the first year of the relaunch, which is totally justifiable. But it's like, I physically can't make up somebody else's time. Yeah. Oh no. And now
in 1987, that was a big deal. Like, you didn't want that, but today, issue 4 is a fill-in. Don't worry about it.
But there would be four artists in the first year instead of one artist. They would just do artists doing an arc of a story or something. So
let me add something about that period of time, DC. DC was a certain number of books late.
Yeah.
And we were getting an enormous amount of pushback from the distributors and from some retailers. These guys buy these books on a non-returnable basis, and the cash flow is a critical thing. So we used to have these weekly editorial meetings. Maybe they still do. I hope not. And Jeanette came in. Jeanette Kahn, who's the publisher, came in. She rarely attended those meetings to make a speech. And her speech was, we no longer have late books, we have late editors. And that was the period of time that you're talking about.
Yeah. But you're asking about, like, the basic thing is, first year Superman, survived it. I had moved to Connecticut. I was friendly with John Byrne. John was happy to co-plot. We would get together, and sometimes over the phone, sometimes we'd go out to have lunch, and we would talk over an idea. He would type it up. I would draw it up. It was fun. It was a fun period. So that second year was fun. And then I think it was in the third year that he quit, and he planned to quit at the end of that Pocket Universe story, but it did happen quickly. And I was going to debut as a writer. I was writing an Adventures of Superman annual at that point while I was drawing on the Pocket Universe story. So John was doing 2 issues of Superman a month because Action had gone away to the weekly. So John was drawing Superman.
Some other brilliant person's idea that was.
Well, I mean, it was just that. So Superman came out twice a month. Adventures was kind of in between there. There was some weird scheduling. So when John quit, the next issue up was going to be Adventures of Superman, which there was no anything for. So Mike, was like, well, give me an ideas for writers. I threw a couple of ideas for writers at him people that I liked, that I knew. And then he, came back at a certain point, like within a couple of days, and said, why don't you try it? You know all the characters, you've already been doing this. I'll help you, So I said, I can't do an issue in the space of 3 weeks. I just, especially it would be my first issue. It's just pressure was crazy. So I suggested using the annual, which had already been penciled and had been scripted, but was 30 pages long. I said, can't you do it without the ads? Just do a 30-page issue. And that's what they did. So that gave me at least a month till the next one was due, because again, it was just a schedule. The Superman had come out, so Adventures was the next one to come out. And then Superman, even though it's now going to come out once a month, it gave me a little time to start up and get my first actual writing and drawing issue done. So, and again, everything you do in comics, if it's something new, I don't know anybody. I hope that other people can do stuff less conflict free or whatever. But for me, my first year of writing and drawing the book was really hard because it was such a learning curve for me. I mean, I had story ideas, but I didn't totally understand how much type on a page fits into a balloon. So Mike Carlin basically, it was like boot camp. He just started drawing lines through stuff that's like, and I learned it's like if you're typing something that's 2 lines, that's as much as you're going to put in one balloon that looks good. If it's more than 2 typewritten lines, do another balloon or drop it. So there were a lot of good lessons, use the art,
Let me point out, I have sung Mike Carlin's praises for years, for decades as an editor. He's a great editor. One of the best Superman editors ever. But I'll tell you something. I learned how to place balloons upside down from Mike Carlin, because at those editorial meetings that I was just referring to, he would often sit across the table from me, and he would bring, Xeroxes of pages for the balloon placements. And I'd watch him do that because, the rest of the meeting was so goddamn exciting that, watching Mike draw circles was terrific. And, but I learned. Now, I'd already been in the business for a while, and left to right, up to down. Some people have a problem with that. I didn't.
Yeah.
I have a problem with other things, but not that. And I learned from Mike. So you were in great hands at that moment.
Oh, it was no. I don't think I could have gotten that from anybody else. Also, I'm not sure that I would have even gotten that from anybody else. In other words, Mike was never afraid to tell you if he was going to change something or if he didn't like something, that's important. A lot of times stuff happens where, not everybody's good at confrontation. So are they going to tell you something that's going to crush you the day before your weekend, or, you know what I mean? It's like Mike was always good. He would always give you the good news and the bad news. And he didn't try to hide stuff from me. So I would find out about stuff like that. He'd tell me, he'd say, I went through we did the correction on the book, and I just want you to know that one line is not going to be in it. And I'd be like, well, why? Why did you take that out? Well, here's the reason. And it's like, I didn't have to agree with him, but I felt like at least he was justifying it, as opposed to just reading the book and going, wait, where's my great speech? Not that any of this, I mean, it's comic books, it's monthly comic books. So, it's all made up, right? I mean, let's be honest. It's you do the best you can in the time frame. But none of us are Shakespeare or something, Alan Moore maybe. But other than that, it's like, stuff gets edited for space. Some stuff doesn't flow right. I mean, if you're a good editor, you obviously you want to hire the people that you trust. But even at that, you're still the final eyes reading that book before it maybe goes off to the printer or something. So that was one of the valuable things about having him doing it with Superman. So I never felt like I was going to, look bad when those books came out. I mean, he could check color. Stuff would go wrong all the time. Something would be screwed up. But generally, most stuff was caught. But it was a great working experience. And so Mike and I worked on Superman that way. And then Roger was Roger Stern and Kerry Gamble and different other people, but they would do Superman. And then at a certain point, I get the Batman movie book. So I started writing. I was trying to draw up through, and then it was like, well, I'll just write the issues while I'm drawing the Batman movie comic. And then when I come off of that, I get to switch and do the actual Superman book. And then Dan Jurgens takes over Adventures of Superman. So I get like the main book. And all this is happening while I'm under a stressful other deadline, which is funny. Right. But so after the Batman thing, I do transition to Superman. And my first issue of Superman that I write is drawn by Kerry Gamble and Kurt Swan. So you can't go wrong. It was like, this is two of the best storytellers, comic book storytellers to me. And then my next one is I get to do the Prankster, and it's still one of my favorite stories because the Prankster is such a goofy character. but I got him using a chainsaw on the cover. So hey, it was the '80s.
Yeah.
Hey kids.
Hey, kids, chainsaws.
You are so lucky that you had Mike there, and
Yeah.
as opposed to let's say Mort Weisinger.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Because you'd be flipping burgers today and be happy about it.
Well, I think about that because I remember, whenever I'd be sitting in the later '80s and the '90s at a convention with Julie Schwartz, I love Julie. We got along so great. We did a ton of shows. It was always fun sitting next to him, sitting in that lineup at the DC booth signing comics, making jokes back and forth. But Julie was hard to work with. I mean, Julie was not like a teddy bear that he was at the conventions. I mean, he was, very approachable and super nice. Drawing wise, if you worked for Julie, it was tough. He was not I don't think he was a fun time, but I don't think any of those guys in that era were probably there to be a fun time or an artist or writer's best friend, So it was lucky to be. I'm happy that I came up through that era that I came up through because, I certainly felt more like I was on a friendly basis with my editor, and I didn't feel like, I was in competition with him or something. But he also never plotted my stories for me. So Julie was, I was just reading that. I was reading Alter Ego about him with the covers. Like Carmine coming up with a cover idea so that they could then plot a story around it. I'm like, God, this had to be kind of frustrating for the writer. We
just had that conversation. I was, I don't know if we may have said it last week. When I was in Terrificon, I grabbed Howard Chaykin and I asked him, why did Gil do all of those covers at that time in the late 70s? It was just every cover was Gil Kane cover.
Yeah.
And his answer was that he needed the money.
Yeah.
Because he had to pay his debts. But Mike also pointed out that, Carmine had been fired, and up until then, Carmine had designed all the covers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that was. No, go ahead. You're going to add something. Go
ahead. Well, I want to transition. I'm going to take I'm going to put a little pin in this. I want to go to this. So you're talking about having an editor. This is the first time that Mike hired Jerry. Is that right? Is that fair? I think you did a Munden's piece in this.
Yeah. I'd gotten offered before, but I was just busy. DC kept me crazy busy. So
we kept on sending Joe Staten up to Milwaukee to harass you.
Yeah, Joe would show up with the baseball bat.
Mm-hmm.
We do this the easy way. We could do this the hard way. No, but yeah, no. That one I think is because again we've talked about it. I was chatting with somebody at the convention about it, and I talked to Ostrander a couple of months ago, talking about what a fun time that First Comics, that little era with First Comics was just a fun time, especially as it revolved around the Chicago Comic Con, because you guys were in Evanston. And the Chicago Con was run by Chicago guys for years and years, and you were part of that too.
Yep.
So it felt like a little like the family picnic or something, the summer picnic. It was just a fun time. And at the show, you'd hang out with everybody. And the idea of doing a story from Munden's Bar was just kind of a cool, like, yeah, I'll do that. And of course, it never comes at the right time, but you do it anyways.
So, but Mike, you knew Jerry for a long time, from the Chicago cons and stuff like that.
Yeah,
What was your experience there, as somebody who, saw him growing?
Oh, well, to tell you the truth, watching Jerry evolve, because I was familiar with his fan work, very familiar with it, that was just a miracle. It was just a wonderful thing to see anybody you've known grow into this sort of the master category. For example, a couple days ago, I was reading a Black Hawk story from 1949. I read this particular story because Wally Wood penciled it.
Oh,
It was one of his first penciling jobs. I don't know who inked it. It could have been Woody, but it was pretty bad. So, I mean, he was just starting out at that point in time. And to see his stuff, you could see, knowing Wally Wood's work, you could see him in those stories, his work in those stories, but it was very crude and it was very early.
Right.
And it's such a kick to look at that, and then you look at Woody's stuff for Harry Harrison at EC, and then his own stories,
Yeah.
which were just magic. And my reaction to watching you grow, it took longer, but because there's no retroactive stuff. But it was the same sort of thing, you know. It's great to see people that you like, that you know, and that you work with get to be great.
Yeah. Well, I remember
it's a wonderful experience.
I remember being like incredibly thrilled to be a professional guest at Chicago Comic-Con. Was the first time was in '81, and
Really?
because I had gotten the DC work the year before, in 1980, they had the talent search, but I'd been at the Chicago Con since the first, I think the second one. It was not the first one, not at the Playboy, whatever that was, but the second one.
Yeah. 76 was Playboy Hotel. And
yeah,
then,
so 77 on. And so it was fun. It was like, this is my home show. And the coolest thing is Mike put me on a panel, my very first panel, my very first professional Comic-Con. I'm sitting on a panel, and it was really funny. And you were you moderator too of the thing, but it was Gil Kane, Joe Kubert, Bill Sienkiewicz. I mean, it was this huge, and I'm sitting like kind of between, Kane and Joe Kubert, and I'm like, talk about the I'm not worthy kind of thing. I just felt like, oh my God. But then on the panel, I remember someone asked Gil about, like, how do you think about inkers? And Gil did his famous story of, if the artist is the director, the inker is the guy who moves or carries the director's chair or something. And it was just funny. It was like such a dismissive thing. And I'm thinking like, hey, I'm inking, But then I immediately, again, stupid young kid, but I immediately like kind of broke in and said, Joe Kubert, sitting right over here, great artist. Joe Kubert inked the first of the Golden Age, the Silver Age Flash stories.
That's right.
Is he carrying somebody's chair or something like that? And I just remember being like, wow, I had so much guts to say that, but I was really nervous to say it. And Gil Kane kind of like, acknowledged everything. And then Joe Kubert, I talked to him, or he talked to me after the show, after the panel, and just said something like, good job, kid, or something. I felt like
couldn't touch the floor.
I felt like I was 10 feet tall. It was crazy. But now Mike, I don't think had to do that. It was really amazing. And it was a really cool introduction into, I'm now in the big leagues, they brought up from the AAA farm club or whatever. But yeah, that was the coolest thing. And then that year I met Dan Jurgens at the show, and he was officially not in comics. He was had just started drawing some Warlord issues for Mike Grell, but Mike Grell wasn't telling DC who drew him. It was like he was trying to sneak him in somehow. So it's just funny. So that show, but the Chicago show has always had this just a wonderful, warm, nostalgic memory thing for me, because I met so many comic book people first time there. Before I was a professional, I got to meet Mike Grell, one of the nicest guys ever. And he was the first professional that I kind of got to know when I was still a fan. And so we would kind of hang around him a little bit at the Chicago shows. And it was just fun. The whole experience of those shows, and being the kid who was the fan guy going into, look, I'm working for DC, was really kind of amazing. So, but again, having gotten my first work the year before at that show from a talent search, from Joe Orlando picking me and Paul Levitz picking me out of, like 50 guys that are waiting in a hot hallway. I mean, that still is a, kind of a fun thing, because we were sitting in a hallway with all the Doctor Who cosplayers, and they had the big scarves and the heavy wool hats, and it was about 115 degrees at the old Pit Congress because they had those windows. I was telling somebody about that at the convention. It's
it was me. We were talking about
they had the windows. It was like the little they were like sweat boxes. If it was a World War II movie, the prisoners would be put in there to get them to talk. But instead, it was like all the artists were in there having to draw with the afternoon sun coming through full wall, size windows, just baking everybody. It was, oh my God.
Tell you, to put a dot on that, the actual temperature outside was 106, which I think is what it is in Chicago right now. But it was 106 then.
Yeah.
And I went upstairs because it was sort of my job to go up and just check out what that Doctor Who thing was doing. Barry Sherritt was running the Doctor Who part of thing, and we had all these tapes the BBC sent us of unaired episodes. So all these Doctor Who fans in their full Tom Baker outfits were crammed into this ballroom, and I mean crammed in. So I opened up the door, and the whoosh of heat. And it wasn't just the heat.
It's not the heat.
Room.
It's the humanity.
It's the humanity. It backed me up right across the corridor there into these beautiful draped windows, big thick drapes, and I just had to see some sunlight. So I looked behind the curtains there, and there was the American Nazi Party.
Oh.
Marching. Yeah. All 5 of them in uniforms, and another 5 hanger-ons who couldn't afford to make uniforms. It was fascist cosplay.
I think the Blues Brothers killed a lot of them the previous year.
Yes. Yeah. Including one of the great directors in Chicago. Yeah, that's true. I thought my life would just never get any weirder than that. It's the only time I ever felt that way, and I was wrong.
You learned your lesson.
I learned my lesson. That show, though, I have such fond memories of that show because for me it was homecoming.
Yeah. No, it was great. You always saw the same people every year, as far as like the people who ran or organized it, the helpers. Everybody was familiar, and everybody knew everybody at that point, because it had been going on for a couple of years, and it just kept growing, which was cool.
We were going to take over the city until the mayor figured it out.
But I remember I think it was in 84 was the year that, 84 was the summer that Kirby was the guest. And maybe it was 83, Jack and Roz came, and we got to hang out with them it was in the, I think that year was the first year at the Rosemont by the airport. Yeah, and there was that remember the restaurant? It was called Roaring 20s, and it was like a speakeasy. So it was like, oh yeah, we got to take the Kirbys there. So DC, we go to and they serve like little bathtub ceramic. You get your gin drink. It was all James Cagney, James Garfield, or John Garfield, all these actor portraits and stuff. And Jack was like immediately into story mode. So we heard all kinds of stuff from his childhood, and we heard the classic war stories and stuff too. But it was really special. And again, the weirdest, just the fact that restaurant was Roaring 20s, all the gangster stuff, it just primed him for all those stories. I don't even know if he had told some of those before, because he was telling stories about his childhood and how his mother told him, never go out with a mall. And we were like, a what? A mall, a gangster's goyle, So that was pretty special. But at the old location at the Pit Congress, the funny thing, that's where the big glass windows. Pit Congress had this huge copper bar. It was beautiful, but it looked, after you saw The Shining, you would see that bartender and go, he was the guy who was serving, Nicholson his Martians or whatever, It was very creepy. That bar had to date back. There had to be a lot of ghosts in that place. My God.
But, It's funny
that
because you
hotel was home to both the Democratic and Republican parties for
Right, right.
many conventions in Chicago, because it was, because of its location, it's had about twice as many as any other city, and that is where the results of the first smoke-filled room
Oh,
came from. It wasn't in the Pitt Congress. It was, or in those days, the Congress Hotel.
yeah.
It was in the Blackstone across the street.
Right,
The
it's true.
Democrats
Yeah.
had a suite across the street, and that was their secret smoke-filled room.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, it was smoke-filled.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's where they'd make all their deals.
That's too funny. But there you could tell. I mean, you knew there was a lot of history in that, anyways. Just that, I mean, that whole area where around the convention felt like that too. But
It's
yeah,
also where Teddy Roosevelt got a speeding ticket
wow, interesting.
on his horse,
I
and
see.
the newbie cop wrote him the ticket. He had to show up in court the next day.
Oh, that's too funny.
Roosevelt certainly did show up in court the next day. He protested the ticket, but he paid the fine
That's crazy.
for
So-
riding his horse too fast down Mississippi.
one of the things that you kind of bringing up about that show and it being kind of family oriented and just a great place to be. I think an example like Terrificon. You're at Terrificon every year, and I think you kind of feel the same way about that it's a place where creators and fans can kind of get together. Baltimore Comic-Con I think is similar to that.
Yeah.
It's great when there's like a kind of a family owned or an individually owned show that's
Yeah.
not part of
Well,
some mass
Right.
bottom
Yeah.
line.
I mean, I think that the idea of a comic show should still be centered on comics, and a
Mhm.
lot of shows are just media shows, which is fine. I just think, I mean, I don't think it's being older, but I really have a problem with the CGC stuff. I understand people want to do it, but it feels kind of, again, it's like anti-reading to me. I
agree.
it's about covers. It's to me, I keep flashing back to the boom time with the sports trading card guys getting into the market. And that's literally the first time we were signing books on the cover, because they were meant to be displayed. They were not meant to be read. And we're kind of back in that same, kind of boat. And what bothers me about it, having the show being fresh in my mind too, what bothers me isn't that people want to do it or that it exists, any of that. It bothers me that people who are maybe buying comics that they actually might read are kind of going to prevent themselves from reading it. I got into comics to tell stories, not to just do covers. And
Right.
it feels like the entire focus is just on that top image and how good it looks and the corners are nice and sharp or whatever, but it's not about reading them. And that kind of makes me a little sad, because it also creates this weird frenzy about people charging for signatures, and it's totally justifiable to charge for a signature. I am at that point where I feel like I got to raise my price. You and I had talked about it, Bob, before the show, and I was like hesitant, but after the show, I was thinking to myself, I couldn't sketch at all. I had very little time other than just signing my name, and I was doing $2 a signature, and I feel like I still feel bad for the guy who's coming with a comic that they read 15 times or had since they were a kid or whatever. So, those parts are those are very conflicting to me, because do what you want. I don't have a problem with that. But like when I go buy an old comics, and I don't do it that often, but when I do it, I do them so I can read them.
Right, sure.
If they're in good shape, I just take care of them. But I don't know. I just don't. I don't get the allure of it. But
I cannot agree with you more. I cannot possibly agree with you more. It's the thought that counts. And you slab a book, it is no longer available for reading.
yeah.
So from day one, when I first saw my first slab rated book, I said, okay, that might say it's Superman 3. It may have the cover of Superman,
Right.
but on the inside, it's little Dracula. And,
It's
Yeah.
it's Schrodinger's comic. It's Schrodinger's comic. It's,
I
it's
mean,
Superman #1, but it also may not be.
right, who knows?
And it,
You'll never know.
once you open it, then it's not Superman 1. Wait,
That's
I
right.
little-
once got a whole pile of comics that were, a friend had given to me because he didn't know what to do with, and I was looking through, and there was, I've told stories about this before. There was a lot of Drek. Was a lot of early '90s Spider-Man. But I'm like, I come across this one. I'm like, oh, here's Alpha Flight #1, and I opened it, and it's not. It's like it's just the cover of Alpha Flight #1, and something else slid inside of it.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean, it was in the great shape. That wasn't.
Yeah.
There was one good book in that list. But there's over 10,000 comics on this side of the screen in this room, and not one of them is Slab because I couldn't read it. Like I don't,
Yeah.
and I want to read them. There's certain things you kind of want as a comic book collector, and I am still a comic book collector. I like to have the things because I want to read them. My read piles are way too long, way too big, long boxes full of read piles. But
Sure.
but I do want to read them. I got I'm trying to do certain things as in my middle age. I'm collecting runs, so I wanted all of New Teen Titans Volume 1, all the newsprint issues, and I had everything except for issue number 2. Issue number 2 is the most expensive. I've seen it in a slab, 9.8 graded for $1,000 because it's the first appearance of Deathstroke the Terminator.
Right.
I do not care that it's the first appearance of the villain. I used to have it when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I bought it. I think I bought it for $10 because the title was ripped off the cover, and I'm like, that's fine. I just want to have the comic.
Yeah. Well, the pressure's off too when the top is ripped off. It's like, hey, no one's going to put that in a CGC clamshell.
That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of glad. I'm not kind of. I'm very glad about the whole trend towards trade paperbacks over the last 10 years. Because in my mind, it's like you're not going to slab this, you're going to read this.
Yeah.
And you're paying for a whole story, often. And, you're paying good money. You're paying $40, $50, whatever, for this giant comic book. And my guess is you're going to read it. You're buying it because you think this is something you want to read.
Yeah.
And that gets us back to the reason why we're here. It's just that simple.
We have a question. What do you guys think about the DC's compacts?
I was just thinking about it because I've seen them at the Cave Comics where I go, and they're kind of cool. And I think the mental process behind it makes sense because there's a whole generation of kids who are now grown, but who were reading manga back in the earlier 2000s during that kind of Borders book, when Borders books was expanding and they had huge sections. So I think it fits that kind of preconceived idea of here's how big a book could be, right? They feel right when you pick them up. I'm all for them. I think, I still like my comics and I like stuff full comic size, but I think it's a smart business move if there's still bookstores or markets like that. I just don't know. I don't really have enough experience to know if bookstores are out there in enough markets to have somebody casually come upon something, or if you have to just special order things like that, sight unseen. I don't know if that works, but it feels like if you walked in a store and you saw it, you would go, yeah, I'm going to pick this up and look at it,
Yeah, I think both are true. But if instead of ordering it from your Barnes and Noble, you'll just Amazon it.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's there.
Yeah.
At least there's access to it. Now, how we get people to want it to be there, that's another story.
I prefer those better. I think actually I prefer those to omnibuses. I don't dislike an omnibus, but I like the idea of a smaller chunk. With an omnibus,
I dislike omnibuses.
well, and again, they're not good for creative because they're printing them to demand by printing just to orders. They sell out immediately, so they never really give us any royalties. In other words, they don't earn royalties because they're not overprinting anything and warehousing anything. So I feel like they're fun if you like to have everything, like all 80 issues of something in one place. It's kind of fun. They probably look good on a shelf, but they're probably bending your shelf because they weigh so much. I really like the smaller bite because, again, like you were saying about reading Titans or whatever, most of these things weren't done as 6 issues is going to be a complete story. There'd be like 6 issues of stories, right? But it's a nice chunk to sit down with. It probably doesn't feel too imposing if you're thinking, gee, I've never read this before. That volume isn't that thick. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of mental things that go into grabbing something casually or whatever to try it. And if you were going to say, I've never experienced Doctor Strange, I think I'll buy a book that's like, 4 inches thick and, 80 pounds. It feels more like you'd want to sample a book like that on a smaller format.
I have one omnibus, and it's holding up this monitor over here.
There is a reprint of every Little Nemo page Winsor McKay did. And this reprint, I mean, there's plenty of them, but in this particular reprint, it was just done beautifully and full size, which means it was the size of a newspaper page.
Right.
And it was 300 pages long, or however many that Windsor did, and it was on heavy paper, heavy white paper, and it is beautiful, one of the most beautiful drawn comics ever, and I can't lift it.
Yeah, you need an assistant.
Yeah, I need an assistant.
You need a page turner. Please come over here and lick your thumb and turn that page for me, would you?
That's why I have an iPad.
You know what the only big books that I really will tell you that I do like are the Tashin reprints that they've done. I've got the first Spider-Man, first Fantastic Four, and first Avengers, and they're reprinted, or they're shot from the comics. They have every page, all the ads. They're really cool. They're nicely done, but you can't sit with one of those on your lap. Your legs will fall asleep within the space of like maybe 10 minutes. So you have to put it on something to read it. But those are great.
They published Paul Levitz's History of DC.
Oh, right. Yep.
And the book, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
The book is bigger than and weighs more than Paul Levitz.
I know. I think that's the thing they showed the publicity photo of Paul with the book, and it was like, oh my God, how big is that book? Because Paul looked like like a doll next to it. It's like, and it is big, but they did a smaller version of it, which is funny. And I actually have the smaller ones, the downsized ones.
Oh, so you can read it.
Yeah.
My problem isn't that it's slab. The problem is that it weighs 200 pounds.
I think maybe a year later, the original print run ran out or sold out, but they did a reprinting of it, and I did pick that up, and I was like, that's kind of closer in size to the Tash and Marvel ones. Let me everybody probably knows what I'm talking about, but in case you don't, I definitely like the idea of plugging something that I really do like. But I mean, it's a substantial book, but it's got like the first, I think, 20 issues in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got nice graphics and stuff. They did a nice job. They got the first, some artwork pages and stuff, but then, they set the stage. And
the pages are set nicely though. They're nicely they're nicely bordered.
So you're not even getting to the first issue, but you're getting a little backdrop of Spider-Man up till that point, and then the actual issues are reprinted. So it's really cool. It's definitely worthwhile. Buy them on sale. I think actually Taschen might have a sale coming up in the next couple days, but it's a $200 book. I waited to get it for $100 on sale, and
Yeah.
I'm happy. The Fantastic Four, I've never read all of those. I read the Marvel Masterworks years and years ago, but seeing them as if I had the books is like amazing, because when you're looking at it, you see the print dots, everything is there. It gives you a little bit of the feel of I've got these books, you know.
Sure,
But
sure, and that's one of the cool things about.
I'm gonna get some water. You mind if I?
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, to talk about me.
you behind your back.
We'll talk
2
about
seconds.
it. We're getting there. Robert's
never
definitely
leave.
agreeing. Oh my God, yeah. Robert's agreeing. So I agree, Robert. You know,
Yeah, and that I think they published that little Nemo that I was talking about.
It's possible. I want to, you know, Jerry, we're getting close to the end. You've done a fantastic job here. Thanks for plugging through.
Well, I'm gonna get in my squeaky chair again.
At the end stages of COVID, but this is coming out tomorrow.
That sounded a lot worse than it is. In the end stages of COVID. Oh my God.
no,
Well,
yeah,
that's the good part. The end stages are the good part. You're just left with that stupid cough for a couple of days. But like, so this comes out tomorrow for people who came in late. You know, you have a story in this. You inked the cover with Dan, and when you're approaching a story, and I kind of wanted to touch on this earlier, but if we can get to it, you've done a lot of stuff. A lot of your work has been with group stories where there's a lot of different characters. You know, your first real work. I mean, besides the inking, that your pencils were on All-Star Squadron, which had as many possible heroes as as Roy could imagine. And you know, you've done some. Is that something you have developed a shorthand for? Is it something you still?
No, and it's funny because I've never been comfortable drawing multiple, you know, like big group scenes, because in my brain, some people are just naturally good at it. Like I think Kirby was amazing at figuring out how everybody had something to do, and maybe it was because of where he grew up and being able to, you know, be a scrappy guy and getting into fights or something. But there's a tremendous amount of choreographing that I have to do when I do these things, and group shots are hard for me. And I think because I did All-Star Squadron, people think I really like doing that. And
I'm not saying you like it. You're
well,
good
no,
at
I'm just
it.
saying. Because like I did those in the Who's Who, I did those, you know, big spreads in the Who's Who of here's all the Justice Society, here's all of everybody in 1940, and I always took them as a challenge, and I always probably they're remembered because I never did them as a deadline thing. I always worked as hard as I could to make them as good as possible in the time allowed. So none of them were like hacked out. Working on Crisis, I think that also influences people's thinking. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, there were George's pencils, but like, did you learn anything from the way he?
I learned that I could never do what George does. I mean, he's like, to me. I mean, I do think he belongs in the pantheon with the greats.
I agree.
Just having worked with him and known him a long time. I mean, he did what he did in comics, nobody else did. I mean, obviously Kirby did, a lot of people did elements of that, but he was amazing just spatially. You know, he could fit the most storytelling on a page of anybody. There's just nobody, as much as people have tried, there's nobody who is as good at it as he was. So, you know, everybody had like a specialty, and I think that was George did great work on Wonder Woman, but at the same time, he's probably more loved for the group stuff because he just was good at it. But again, it's like Kirby too, with I immediately think of, Captain America jumping into a group of Nazi soldiers or whatever. I mean, it takes a lot of spatial ability when you're drawing to make it work and make it fit and not make it feel, I mean, like guys, I can approach that. I have to work it out in advance. I couldn't just draw it cold, without doing a little layout or something. But
I
yeah,
think
like
the part that people tend to overlook, or at least not state, about Kirby's work and what made Kirby a giant is that he brought that energy to the page. His compositions were always somebody's bringing energy from there to your face.
yeah.
To your face.
Yep.
And if you go look through some of his stuff at random, it's a mind-blowing experience from that perspective.
Yeah. But I mean, even his romance stuff was dynamic, which is funny. I mean, that's why I say, like, so much of it is in you. I think in my basic sensibilities have always been more Wally Wood, more Alex Raymond, Hal Foster, and those are more stagey kind of guys. Like I think Wood, I think he even admitted in interviews or something, but he was in awe of how Frazetta could move a figure. It just was so fluid. And I totally understand that because, like, say, again, comparing Kirby having a figure move versus Wood's figures were always great and they moved fine, but they didn't have that fluidity. There's something they didn't have. And I think that's where I come from. I think that I think of it, I try hard to make it look fluid, but it's not natural to me. So it's not like something that I just throw off. It's something that I have to work at. I can draw a guy standing, hands on hips, fairly, simply. I mean, I know how that looks, but to draw somebody jumping into a fight or 10 guys fighting and punching stuff, there's always a lot of mental work that goes into that, But
which brings me back to George Perez, because George Perez did one of the greatest imitations of Frank Frazetta I've ever seen on the program book, whatever you call it, for the stage play Little Abner.
Oh yeah,
in which he played Little Abner,
right,
and
right,
true in Al Cap's style,
right.
Cover. And it wasn't really Al Cap's style, pretty much on the faces, yes, absolutely. Yeah. The rest was Frazetta.
It was that Frazetta era probably that he was inspired by, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's so interesting to hear you talk that way, because I don't you can, there's no question about you being able to, draw the hands on hips, person in a fantastic way. But like your fluidity and your storytelling. I mean, I remember growing up, like, everything's going great. It fell on the page and and then it jumped off of it.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I think just that when you're conscious of it, you feel like that's maybe a weakness that you are always conscious of, trying to make sure it doesn't look stiff or make sure that the action flows or whatever. Well, I know a lot of people where that's like kind of second nature to them. And, but again, maybe the pose characters isn't that second nature, I mean, but yeah, a lot of that came from All-Star Squadron, because I was working in it was like 1980, early 20s, I guess, 23 maybe, I don't know. I was conscious of the fact that I wanted it to look period. So even in inking it, I would go back to Alex Raymond, and everybody in comics in the 40s swiped Alex Raymond, or they swiped Milton Caniff or something. But the Alex Raymond but I mean, the Alex Raymond is the template for superhero comics, Superman, any superhero character, because they swipe so much from him. In the same way, I think that during the 80s, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez became kind of the template for the DC universe, because he did such a specifically great job with the style guide stuff that it inspired, I think, my generation of artists coming after that to aspire to try to draw as well as. So, in a way, there's a lot of Garcia Lopez swiping probably in that from the time the style guide came out, in the same way maybe that Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon was swiped for not only Batman, but Superman and Starman, and everybody was swiping it. So,
well, yeah, and Hawkman.
right, exactly. So, I mean, so when I was doing All-Star Squadron, I was thinking, like, I'm working on Rich Buckler, who is basically drawing Neil Adams swipes. How do I make this look like a 1940s thing? Because I didn't want it to look like the standard Rich Buckler comic, because it was not era specific. So I just went to all the 40s stuff that I could find and tried to get a little Will Eisner into Liberty Bell, and I tried to get a little of I even some Milton Caniff and some I whatever I could to try to give it the feel of being 1940s. So, and I think in a way that those things kind of become part of your DNA after you do it a couple times, So I know I traced over Alex Raymond just like everybody else. I would look through my Flash Gordon books, and it's like, well, there's a nice profile of a guy with standing like that. Did a little tracing on it, and then drew from the tracing into a page, or inked from that to ink over a Buckler thing, something. You then add it to your, I guess it's your bag of tricks or something, and then by the time you do it 3 or 4 times, it's kind of yours, but it has its origin as that other thing. So
I was talking to a younger. Go ahead.
Just remember, Jerry, that kids who are just being born now go to their library or a bookstore or whatever, go nuts over something you did when you were in your 20s, and become artists because of it.
Right.
Our job is also to prime the pump.
Yeah. Oh no, and that's the fun part about going to shows is you meet somebody that, they're a big fan of this. I mean, a couple of years ago, I think it was my first Baltimore con, is when I met Philip Kennedy Johnson, and he was doing like I think a self-published thing.
Sure.
Nobody knew him. I didn't know him either. He came up to me and just told me, gave me his books and said, "Oh, I just wanted to, how big a fan I was, and I'm very inspired and all that." And then like within a couple of years, I'm seeing him doing Action Comics. I'm thinking, that's the same guy I met. Wow, this is pretty amazing. So as you're saying with me, like Mike looking at me and feeling kind of some pride and seeing me come up, I felt that with him, with as far as how fast he seemed to have risen, but he's solid. He's like a really good writer. I've seen artists the same way, people that I knew or that I met when they were fans, and sometimes I don't remember them either. And somebody, will come up and say, "Yeah, you gave me a little art critique, or you looked at my portfolio back in, 1987 or something." And you take it for granted because they remember you. You don't remember them, but that is a pay it forward situation. Just like when I was a kid, and I was inspired by Kirby and John Buscema and John Romita and Gil Kane. All those guys did go Wally Wood. You're kind of paying it forward in a way. So it's fun, and it's also the whole reason to do a show. I mean, I don't go to a show it's not like I don't like making money, but I don't go with the expectation of that. People can get mad standing in line, but I give everybody the same amount of conversation that they want, because that's what's fun about it for me.
That's right. That's what it's about.
Yeah. I mean, it's not an interaction of just, I signed his book. I mean, what do you do? What's your life like? When did you start reading comics? I kind of am curious. I mean, that's what kind of is fuel for me, I can't be alone in that. I'm sure most of us have that feeling, when we go to a show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you love the hobby, right? You love this stuff, and it's very gratifying to see that there are younger people who still love it, and maybe they don't love the same stuff you did, but they still love the comics as a medium. And that feels good to me, because again, that's your future. It may not be what we grew up on, but it means that the medium and the whole idea of comics will kind of live on in some form, so.
Absolutely
I
right.
appreciate
That's the beauty of it. We're in the middle of this thing that started long before us, hopefully will last long after us.
Yeah.
And, we've entertained people and we've kind of gotten a couple off on their start to a career. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
But it's still the only thing think about it. Someone can make a indie movie. It's going to cost money. It's going to require more than one person. But one person can sit down and draw a comic book, You can find somebody to print it, whatever, but it's still that expression. And that's like at Terrificon, I talked to several people about that, a couple of guys one kid comes by every year and shows me his work, and he's either very shy, I feel like he's scared to approach or whatever, but the first year I just said, come on over. And then, other people were looking at it and they're giving him compliments, and you could see that's kind of like food. You could see him kind of take it in like, wow, they're actually saying nice things. I was a little worried. So year by year, I think it's the third year I've seen this same kid, and I can tell you I could see a change and an improvement in his work. And it doesn't have to be leaps and bounds, and it's not, but there's definite improvement. And I feel like there's a lot of times that's kind of discounted. Like everybody expects maybe I'm just suddenly going to get good or whatever. But you don't unless you keep at it, You still have to work at it. And then somehow you do a good drawing and you go, where'd that come from? And then that gives you the drive to try to match it, and that's how it works,
It's a conversation that, kind of taking on what you said, as you would, figure out ways to do certain things, and then it become part of your toolbox or something you would use. And I had this conversation with a younger artist earlier this summer. I was looking at his pages, and he's kind of developed something with the way he does eyes. It's really captivating. He's really done something where it gives a lot of life to the characters. And I noticed, I really like the way you're doing eyes. And he's like, yeah, I kind of figured something out with that. And then, and he's getting work, but you can tell that he's somebody who's constantly improving and getting better. And he's going to be one of the really top artists in the business soon. Yeah. But again, it's that concept.
You have to keep everybody thinks they're getting better. There's obviously a point where you, especially like right now at my age, the hardest thing is having the transition lenses, because it does give a distortion, which a lot of times I don't notice until I scan something in and I look at it and I go, oh, and it's weird because it's not something I would even have thought of 10 years ago. I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But then, I'd look at artists as they got older. It's like you start drawing heads too big, or there's always something. And I guarantee you it's mostly a physical thing, because Perez went through it too. And George had all kinds of eye problems. There's just something that, you're fighting. So you want to keep improving. I don't want to put bad drawings out in the world, however, whatever drawings I still have left, I'd like to have them look decent, but you're still trying hard and everything, but you're suddenly fighting the effects of aging, which are hard too, that's kind of weird to me. It just had that realization not too long ago, is that, it's the transition aspect. It's because, your glasses go from a distant to, the distant prescription or whatever. You're looking at stuff differently than you would if you had a regular prescription of some sort. So it's a weird, another thing to adjust to, besides bad paper and bad pens or ink or whatever that are different now. But you work through it somehow.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
Jerry, we're over time. Actually,
we're over. we but it's been a great conversation.
Am I getting time and a half from now on, or double
Sure.
time?
Yeah.
Well, I want to say you're gonna be at Baltimore Comic Con in a couple weeks. You'll be recovered. We'll have our annual event. I will be moderating a panel with you at Baltimore. We're gonna do I think it's called DC in the 80s, and it's you and a whole bunch of other folks. That sounds fun.
But it's the 1880s, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Well, we're doing Gotham by Gaslight,
But the paper was so much better back then, honestly.
Oh my God, yes. The engravers.
I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll have you back on soon.
Very, very
It was
much.
great having you.
Lots of fun.
It's always a pleasure getting into conversation with you, but 2 hours, this is wonderful.
Great job.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
Thursday.
We have Eric Blicki on the show. We are going to be here in 2 days. We're going to have lots to talk about. We'll get him in early as we can. I'm looking forward to that. We're going to have a show next week. Kind of still figuring out who our guest is. And then we're going to have a little bit of a break. We are not going to be on the air giving you a programming announcement. We're not going to be on the air on September 10th. Mike is going to be on the road.
Sweet home Chicago.
There's a big thing happening that night, so we don't want to counter program that. I'll figure out something else to do other than watch that anyway. But we won't be on the air on September 10th. We will have a show next week. We'll figure out who that is. Please be here Thursday night. Make sure you subscribe to wherever you are watching this so you know when we're coming live. 8 o'clock, 2 days. We will see you there.
All right. Thanks for coming. Thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for being with us.
See you later.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network.